I can't do that. I'll kill you if you hurt my son.
Greetings and salutations, guys. I'm here with my review of Drop. This is a new thriller directed by Christopher Landon, a filmmaker I'm a big fan of. He's made the Happy Death Day movies. He made Freaky. He recently co-wrote Heart Eyes, though he didn't direct that film. And I love all those movies. I especially love the Happy Death Day movies. I am incredibly excited that there's going to be a third one. But, you know, this movie is definitely veering away from what he's been doing for a while, because it is, first of all, a thriller. It is not a horror movie. And also it's not as overtly comedic. That's not to say there's no sense of humor. But, you know, the central premise, the central vibe of the movie is a serious thriller with some witty moments around that do remind you of who the filmmaker behind this is. Story here focuses on Violet, played by Megan Fahey. She's a single mom with a 5-year-old son who has a very traumatic past. She had a very abusive husband. She hasn't dated in a long time for, you know, understandable reasons, but now she's going out there on her first date in years. She's been talking to this guy online, seems really sweet. They go out to a fancy restaurant together after, you know, months of chatting. And this is Henry, played by Brandon Sklenar, and everything would be going great if it weren't for the fact that her phone is blowing up. It's blowing up with drops from someone who is in the restaurant, who is saying very threatening things to her and asking her to do increasingly awful things that have to do with her date, and things that this person needs her to do and is threatening her family if she doesn't go through with it. It's a really fun, interesting premise that's obviously very situational and is primarily set in one place. This restaurant, as she's dealing with this situation, harkens back. I've seen a lot of people mention Hitchcock films, but you can also think of movies like Phone Booth, anything that has to do with you are in this confined space, something terrible can happen if you don't solve this situation here. And I think that Landon really shows what sort of a expert he is at building suspense in a situation like this. And it's really well done because, you know, it's a whodunit as far as who in this restaurant is the person setting these drops. And we get to know a lot of the different people in the restaurant, whether it be the staff or the other customers. And it starts to become the question of who could it be. And at first, Henry is helping her with this when he just thinks it's a creeper. But then she's kind of being quiet more and more about what's actually being asked of her because it involves him. This requires this movie, I think, actors to really sell it because it is such a heightened situation. And that's where Megan Fahey obviously is a wonderful get. You know, has she proved on The White Lotus, she is an exceptional actress who can really bring a lot of depth to a role. And this character, you know, does have this heavy history. At the same time, this movie is not trying to be kind of weighted down in just the misery of that, but it is a fact of life for her. And I think that Fahey really sells that. And the moments where she has to kind of really get real with that, both in flashbacks, but also in the present, about what she's been through, what it's meant to her, what she's still dealing with because of that, the sort of PTSD of it all, really sells in the middle of what is mostly a pretty fun, heightened thriller. And I think that Brandon Sklenar is very good working off of her. He has almost the trickiest role because he has to be very reactive, and he also has to be a guy who sits there through a lot. And look, the movie pushes it to the limit as far as how odd she is clearly acting around this date because she's being asked to do all these things, because it constantly means she has to get up and leave the table and make an excuse why she's doing that. And it pushes the plausibility as far as him not leaving at a certain point. I think the movie does the best it can to deal with that, to kind of try to explain who he is, their dynamic together that they've developed online now that they do have chemistry in real life, but she is acting like a very strange person on this date. And I think the actors do a good job of sort of grounding that, even though maybe if they'd had like a couple less times that she might have sold it a little more. I really like how the film cinematically deals with the fact that so much of it is texting and, you know, reading stuff off of your phone, which can be very boring cinematically, but visually the way they do that. And I know it's not the first movie to sort of present text on screen as large graphics, but they have a lot of fun with it here. You know, it kind of it deals with its own sort of reality and the fact that when she's reading her phone, we see the words huge on screen, but if she's in the bathroom, say, we actually see them reflected in the mirror when the shot cuts to a different angle, and it's just things like that. There's one part where character walks through the text on screen. Not that they notice it; it's just this fun visual device for us. To make things work in a movie that could feel overly confined. It's supposed to feel confined, but you don't want to feel like, okay, I need to get out of this restaurant. This is not interesting. Also, the set is great. It is supposed to be this big, fancy, high-rise restaurant in Chicago at the top of a tower. And they did a fantastic job building the set, the layout of it. You really understand the layout, the tunnel. There's sort of like a long tunnel from the lobby into the main dining area where the bar is, because it becomes very important as the movie progresses to understand that and to get the geography in your mind. And I think Landon and his set designer have done a phenomenal job together of making that all work. So yeah, I definitely really enjoy this movie. I do think it maybe peters out a little bit by the end. Not even by the end, I think, because it has a fun conclusion, sort of the dramatic conclusion. I'll get to one quibble I have about the very, very end in a second. But it just, even at 95 minutes, it's probably has as much as you can do in this situation. But yeah, I think that cast all really sells it. And I want to sort of especially call out Jeffrey Self, who plays Matt. He is their waiter. And it's a funny little running gag in the movie that it's his first night as a waiter, and he's nervous and he's flustered, and he's got this woman who is making him extra flustered because she is behaving so oddly. And like I said, this is not nearly as comedic as Christopher Landon has often done with his movies, but it still has a sense of humor. And a lot of that comes from Jeffrey Self's character and his performance, and other moments throughout that are, kind of the insanity of the situation gets addressed or acknowledged in funny ways that don't push it into satire. And I definitely appreciate that about it. Like I said, I think it has an exciting conclusion as far as how it all comes together, this escalating situation. I didn't love the very, very end, the coda. It's just one of those things where I thought tonally it didn't quite land where it's going for. There's a couple lines of dialogue that I thought maybe shouldn't have, kind of been pushed in the way they are. Maybe there's a little bit of sense of humor where they should have held back, actually, at that point. Because I think for most of the movie, it does a very good job of kind of writing that line and making the central situation tense and the fear plausible while also having some funny moments. But in the very, very end, I didn't love the note it kind of went out on at the very end. But overall, I thought this was a very enjoyable movie with this sort of very specific situation. And it's almost kind of like a cinematic exercise to see how it plays out and can they make it work. And I think he does. I don't think it's one of Christopher Landon's best movies, but I still think it shows just how skilled he is, that it's like another very entertaining one. And I can't wait to see his next one. And I hope it's Happy Death Day 3. I know they just announced that they're doing it. We don't know if it's, next in line, but I'm very excited for that. But yeah, Drop was definitely an enjoyable time as well. So those are my thoughts on Drop. God, am I going to do the pun? Yeah, I'm going to do it. It dropped in theaters this weekend. I'm sorry. Forgive me. It's right there. You have to, right? I guess I didn't have to, but I did. All right. If you can still, besides the fact that I did that pun, if you can still and if you can still subscribe, I'd appreciate it. Thanks, guys. Take care.